It was an ordinary dawn. The breeze blew gently through the trees of a small village at the foot of the mountain. The bells of the local parish church hadn't begun to ring yet, and the sky had that vague color between violet and orange that one only sees when the world hasn't fully awakened. It was in that fragile, silent moment that something broke the stillness of the air. A young woman fell to her knees next to the local Marian grotto, her face reflecting a mixture of terror and beauty. She was pale, her lips trembled, and her eyes seemed to be looking at something that wasn't there, at least not for others. Her name was Isabel, a girl of barely 17 who lived with her grandmother and prayed the rosary alone every morning before going to school. She was known for her humility and her tenderness toward the elderly. Nothing about her caught anyone's attention until that day. The first people who approached thought she had fainted or had a nervous breakdown. But it was enough to hear her words to understand that something else was happening. I saw her. I saw her descend into the light, and she wasn't alone, she murmured, her voice breaking. Everyone looked at each other in confusion. "The Virgin?" a woman asked. Isabel nodded, tears in her eyes. "The Virgin, and a being who burned like the sun." Some mocked, others simply walked away. But a small crowd formed around her. What Isabel began to relate, almost in a trance, was impossible to ignore. She said that the Virgin Mary was dressed in dazzling white, with a veil that shone as if it contained the stars of the sky. At her side, an imposing figure with immense wings and a flaming sword in its hand stood firm as an eternal guardian. "It's St. Michael. I knew it without anyone telling me," the young woman explained in a fragile but clear voice. The silence among those present was absolute. The most disconcerting thing was what she said next. According to Isabel, the Virgin didn't come with a message of comfort, but rather an urgent warning. Her words were sweet but firm. I felt love, but also the weight of something imminent. She said that time is growing short, that we have crossed an invisible line, that heaven can no longer remain silent. It was then that many began to weep without knowing why. It was as if the soul recognized a truth that the intellect had not yet accepted. The news spread like wildfire across the dry countryside. Soon, journalists, curious onlookers, priests, and even local authorities arrived. Everyone wanted to hear Isabel's testimony, but something in her demeanor showed that she wasn't seeking fame or attention. She remained in prayer with a deeply wounded gaze. She said she could still hear the voice of the Virgin inside her, like an echo that never faded. She asked me to speak, not to be afraid. That the world needs to know what's coming. One of those present, an elderly priest who had worked in Marian missions in Eastern Europe, approached with tears in his eyes. "This is nothing new," he said softly. "In all authentic apparitions, there is always a beginning like this, simple, pure, marked by the fear of God. And if what this little girl saw is true, we are dealing with something very, very serious." The following days were a mixture of confusion, hope, and fear. Some media outlets dismissed the event as mass hysteria or mystical delirium, but others began to recall ancient prophecies. Garabandal, Fatima, La Salette, places where Our Lady warned of difficult times and called for urgent conversion. Were we witnessing a continuation, a new chapter in the call from heaven? The answer seemed to come sooner than expected. Elizabeth herself, in the midst of a second mystical experience, announced that Saint Michael would manifest himself again with a message of his own. "He will not come to console," she said in a trembling voice. "He will come to awaken." And so the anticipation multiplied, because if the Queen of Heaven had already spoken, what would the commander of her armies have to say? The community began to change. Family rosaries resumed. The chapel, previously empty, began to fill up at all hours. The confessors couldn't keep up. Even young people who had been away returned to the sacraments with a new sparkle in their eyes. Isabel spoke only when necessary. "I only repeat what you tell me," she insisted. And she always asked the same thing: pray, fast, listen. But the most powerful thing would come later, because on the night of the third day, Saint Michael descended, and her presence left no room for doubt. It was the third night since the first apparition. The air was thicker than usual. Many in the village couldn't sleep, as if an invisible tension kept them awake. The small grotto where Isabel had first seen the Virgin had been transformed into a sacred place. Candles were lit, flowers were placed, rosaries were hung in the bushes, and hundreds of people prayed day and night with heavy hearts. But no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what was going to happen that night. Isabel was silent, kneeling, when she suddenly fainted backward, as if an invisible wind had pushed her. She fell backward, but didn't hit herself. Her eyes flew open and remained fixed upward. A cry escaped her throat. "He has come." No one understood. Some ran toward her, but it was then that an extremely powerful light descended from the sky. It wasn't a natural light. It wasn't white, yellow, or gold. It was a mixture of fire and purity, as if justice itself had been incarnated in the form of light. In the midst of that light, a figure appeared. It was a being in shining armor, with outstretched wings that grazed the ground, and a sword that burned as if it were the sun itself. His gaze pierced souls. He didn't speak yet, but his mere presence made many fall to the ground to weep or confess their sins aloud, unable to contain themselves. The atmosphere became dense, sacred, as if every second weighed tons. It was Saint Michael the Archangel, and they knew it without anyone saying so. Finally, he spoke, but his voice didn't come from his mouth. It sounded directly into the hearts of everyone present. It was like a gentle thunderclap that didn't hurt, but burned its lifeline. Judgment has begun. The sword is unsheathed, not out of hatred, but out of love. Because the time of mercy has been rejected time and again. And now, the time of truth has arrived. At that moment, some began to tremble, others to vomit. There were those who clung to the rosary like a lifeline. Saint Michael didn't come gently, he came urgently. To those who mock heaven, heaven will no longer answer. To those who have hidden the truth, I will expose them. And to those who still listen, they still have hope. His sword began to glow brighter. He pointed it at the ground, and a line of fire was drawn on the earth right in front of Elizabeth. Here is the limit. Beyond this, there is no turning back. Many screamed, some fled, but others stayed on their knees crying like children, because they knew, even if they had never seen an angel, even if they didn't understand theology, their hearts knew they were facing the truth. It was as if the soul, dormant for years, suddenly woke up. And the first thing it saw was the sword of judgment, no longer a threat, but a last chance. St. Michael continued, "They have handed over the innocent. They have killed the faith on the altars. They have desecrated the body of my queen. And yet they were offered forgiveness, but they closed their ears. Now heaven speaks with fire." Each word seemed to ignite something in the air. Some said they felt physical heat, as if the air had become a living flame. Others said they heard bells, even though there were none in the area. But what no one could deny was that something supernatural had just manifested, and that it was not an illusion. The apparition lasted exactly 23 minutes. At the end, St. Michael raised his sword to the sky and shouted, "Prepare yourselves, for the Queen will speak again, and her voice will be the last before the warning." With those words, he disappeared into the light. Isabel fell to the ground, exhausted. She was carried in the arms of her grandmother and a group of village women. No one spoke for a long time. Only the wind and the muffled cries of those who knew that something sacred had just touched the earth could be heard. From that day on, many began to pray like never before. Men who hadn't set foot in church for decades entered on their knees. Young people put down their phones to pray the rosary. Entire families lit candles in front of their homes. But the attacks also began. Critical voices, disbelieving media outlets, and even church authorities began to deny everything. Collective hallucinations, they said. But the more they denied it, the more people were touched to the core. Because the truth cannot be silenced. Because when heaven speaks with a sword, the soul trembles. And when St. Michael announces judgment, it's no longer a fantasy, it's a conversion, life or death, salvation or damnation. And the Virgin still had more to say. Isabel hadn't spoken since St. Michael disappeared into the light. Her body, although uninjured, seemed exhausted inside. The doctors who examined her found no physical abnormalities, but said she was as if she had run 10 marathons in a row. Her grandmother never left her alone for a second. She herself recounted that the young woman, in unconscious whispers during her sleep, repeated phrases in languages she had never learned. Forgive, pray, purification is coming. The town had changed. No one dared to speak out loud about superficial things. The atmosphere was different. Some described the feeling as like being in a hospital and knowing someone close to you is dying. It was as if time had stopped in an invisible countdown. And in the midst of that sacred silence, the day arrived when the Virgin Mary once again revealed herself to Elizabeth. But this time, the young woman didn't fall. She remained standing, as if supported by an invisible force, with her eyes open, looking upward, as if speaking to someone no one else could see. When she began to speak, it was with disarming serenity. She didn't shout. She didn't tremble. Her voice was gentle, but each word seemed to carry the weight of a rock on her heart. The Queen of Heaven has spoken. She has entrusted me with 3 secrets, and she commanded me to reveal them to the world today. The people surrounding the grotto looked at one another. No one knew what to expect. Some wept before they heard. Others lit candles or held hands. The moment had arrived. The first secret, according to Isabel, was delivered through tears by the Virgin. She said that her church is being wounded from within, that many shepherds have stopped guiding the flock and are now scattering it, that there is betrayal within the sacred walls, and that very soon something will fall and everyone will see it. The young woman repeated that last phrase 3 times. Very soon something will fall and everyone will see it. Some understood that she was speaking of an internal purification. Others thought of a physical event. But the truth is that many priests present lowered their gaze in silence. The second secret touched the souls of those listening. The Virgin said that humanity has been manipulated, that false fears have been sown to hide eternal truths, that there are powers preparing something that will seem good, but will lead to the loss of many souls. Isabel didn't fully understand what she was conveying, but she described symbols, technical terms, and even approximate dates. The Virgin specifically mentioned that the use of technology will become the new Tower of Babel, and many will worship the image of the beast without realizing it. Those who studied prophecies recognized the references, and some simply couldn't stop crying. But it was the third secret that caused a silence no one had ever experienced in that place. Isabel looked down, knelt, and said, "This," he whispered it to me, and I couldn't repeat it. Not until today. Her body trembled. She clasped her chest with one hand, as if gasping for air, and then she said it. "A global event will come from heaven. No one will be able to deny it. It won't be a punishment. It will be a revelation. Every soul will see their state as God sees it. It will be painful, it will be transformative, it will be the warning." And then she fell silent. A young priest stood up suddenly. He had spent years studying the prophecies of Garabandal and Medjugorje. "It's the same thing the girl said in the 1960s. The warning, God will show the truth of the soul to every human being on earth." No one responded, but many felt a shiver run through their entire bodies. Because if that were true, if one day we will all see what we are without masks, who will be able to bear it? Isabel, still kneeling, said the Virgin showed her something else. "I saw a line of fire separating 2 paths, one of light, one of darkness. And there were souls walking through the darkness, blindfolded, laughing, dancing, unaware that they were heading straight for the abyss. The image was so powerful that several people fainted. Others began to pray out loud, begging for forgiveness, as if they knew the image wasn't symbolic, but literal. After the message, Isabel was taken home, where she entered a state of total silence. She didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't respond. She only prayed. Her grandmother said it was as if her soul had gone somewhere else. "She's no longer with us," she repeated, weeping. "She's between heaven and earth." And so the days passed while the world around her began to divide. Because while some firmly believed, others mocked. Some television channels tried to discredit her, others tried to buy her testimony. But Isabel was no longer the same. The message had been given, the 3 secrets had been revealed. And now, each person had to decide what to do with it. Because the Virgin didn't come to entertain, she came to warn. And Saint Michael hadn't yet said his last word. The afternoon was cloudy. The sky had that thick grey that doesn't rain, but also doesn't let in the light. In the town square, prayer groups had begun to multiply. They were no longer just elderly women or regular worshippers. Now there were teenagers, men who had previously laughed at the faith, mothers with babies, people who had come from far away. They all came seeking something they couldn't put into words, as if their hearts had been wounded by something invisible but real. Isabel hadn't spoken again since she revealed the 3rd secret, until that day. It happened during an outdoor mass. The priest had just finished the consecration when Isabel, standing in the crowd, suddenly shouted, "She's here!" No one had seen her move. Her voice, however, was like thunder. Everyone turned at once. A dead silence fell. Isabel's face lit up, but her eyes reflected sadness. People nearby said it was like looking at someone who had just seen the end of something they loved. And then she began to speak. "Not all villages will be touched at the same time. Not all cities will see the first light or the first fire. The Queen showed me a map where some regions were covered by a black cloud. And she said to me, 'It will all begin in the places where they no longer pray to me, where my name has been silenced, where they have expelled me as if I were an enemy of humanity.'" A murmur of astonishment was heard among those present. Elizabeth continued, "Where the altars have been torn down, where the cross is shame, where children no longer know who I am, there the shaking will begin." A man raised his hand and asked, trembling, "What kind of shaking?" Isabel looked down. "I wasn't allowed to see the details, but I was allowed to see the fruits. I saw collapsed houses. I saw families torn apart by despair. I saw empty churches and full hospitals. I saw people screaming that no one had warned them." Her voice broke, and the Virgin was weeping as she showed me this. She said it's not punishment, it's consequence, that the world has chosen to live without God, and because of that, it won't know how to live when He speaks. Many began to pray out loud. The priest took the microphone and led an impromptu rosary, but Isabel didn't stop. "The Virgin showed me how evil has entered through the portals we ourselves opened, with words, with decisions, with laws, with silence. She told me, the people who stop praying stop protecting themselves. When you don't pray, the enemy advances. When my name is erased, the door to pain opens." Tensions grew when Isabel mentioned that some of those places marked by the Virgin were in Latin America. "Don't think you're safe just because you have churches or processions. There are places where everything is just appearances, where faith is culture, but not life. There the enemy advances unhindered." Some began to cry as if they understood that their city, their community, their family could be among those places forgotten by heaven. And then came a phrase that many will remember forever. "Where the rosary is no longer prayed, the earth will dry up. Where confession is no longer said, the air will be poison. Where bread is no longer consecrated, hunger will be spiritual, but it will also be physical." Someone asked if there was salvation. Elizabeth nodded firmly. "Yes, but it is now. Later it will be too late." The Virgin said, "If a people returns to me, I will cover them with my mantle. If a family consecrates itself, I will preserve it. But you must decide now, because time is no longer time." The news spread like wildfire. Similar reports began to arrive from other parts of the world: apparitions, tears in images, prophetic dreams. It was as if heaven were crying out for the last time. And while some searched for proof, others fell to their knees. Because it wasn't about proving, but about listening. It wasn't a time to speculate, it was a time to return to God. Isabel was taken to a small house where she could rest. But before leaving, she left a written warning on a piece of paper that she gave to the priest. He read it aloud the next day. "Everything will begin where my name no longer resides. But there too the first flame of repentance will be lit. For when everything collapses, some will return to me with their hearts bared. And I will welcome them. Most Holy Mary." The phrase was etched into everyone's skin. Some began walking around their city, praying in low voices, marking crosses with holy water on doorsteps. Others organized vigils. Even the coldest among them couldn't deny that something invisible was haunting them inside. It was as if their conscience had awakened after years of sleep, as if a mother finally spoke with real tears. And although Isabel remained silent again, it was known that the next revelation would not be long in coming, because the Virgin was not finished, and what was to come would show that heaven is ever closer to earth. The next morning was different. The sky was not the same color. Many said the air felt thick, as if each breath took more effort. Others claimed to have had intense dreams during the night, with lights, fire, and a voice whispering to them, "Prepare yourself." The most sensitive ones began to cry without knowing why. It wasn't fear, it was something deeper. It was as if the soul sensed that it was about to witness something sacred, something that could not be explained with human words. That's when it happened. It was exactly noon. In the square, a crowd was praying the rosary as they had done every day since the first revelations. Isabel sat silently beside her grandmother, her gaze turned toward heaven. Suddenly she slowly stood up, as if an invisible force were calling her. She raised her hand and said in a clear voice, "Look to heaven, do not be afraid. This is the sign," she promised. Many raised their eyes and saw it. The sun, which had been shining normally until then, began to intensify. Its light grew whiter, but it wasn't blinding. Then it began to spin, slowly, as if dancing. Some began to scream, others knelt, but no one could tear their gaze away. The sun rotated as if following some ancient, unknown, deep rhythm, and then it stopped, completely. Not a cloud moved, not a bird crossed the sky. Everything remained suspended. Time seemed to stop. Clocks stopped ticking away. It wasn't a collective illusion. Doctors, engineers, teachers, everyone witnessed it. The sun stopped moving for exactly 10 minutes, and in that time, many began to experience things impossible to describe. Some saw scenes from their lives as if in a movie. Others heard inner voices reminding them of forgotten sins. Some felt a dull ache in their chest, as if something inside them was slowly breaking. Isabel spoke again. "This is the sign that precedes the great warning. The Virgin said that heaven needs to awaken its children, that many will not change by faith, but will change by fear. Therefore, this dance of the sun is the first call for the soul." At that moment, several fainted. Others began to confess out loud, as if they could no longer hold back what they were carrying inside. The local priest, weeping, ran to the makeshift altar and began distributing the Eucharist as if it were the last time. But the most shocking thing was what came next. When the sun resumed its course and time began to flow again, an image remained etched in the retinas of many. Some saw the silhouette of the Virgin in the midst of the sun. Others claimed that within that light appeared a great resplendent cross. They all agreed on one thing: heaven had spoken, and the language was not human, it was divine. And the message was clear: the time of indifference was over. The media was quick to arrive. Some tried to discredit the event, calling it an unidentified atmospheric phenomenon. But videos recorded by dozens of cell phones showed the same thing from different angles. The sun rotating, then stopping, and finally resuming its course. There was no scientific explanation that could justify it, and they knew it. Similar testimonies began to arrive from other countries. People at the same time reported strange behavior from the sun. A woman in Portugal claimed to have seen the same phenomenon while praying the rosary with her children. An elderly man in the Philippines reported hearing a voice telling him, "I am the mother of the warning. Do not close your heart." It was as if heaven had decided to break its silence all over the world at the same time. Isabel was interviewed again, but she only wanted to say one sentence: "It's not the end, it's the beginning of revelation. This sign was an act of mercy. The next will be one of justice." Then she left. No one saw her for days. Her grandmother said she was in seclusion, praying, preparing her soul for what was to come. She doesn't eat. She only drinks holy water and prays. She says the Virgin has shown her what comes next, and that not everyone will be able to endure it. What no one knew was that meanwhile, a group of children who used to play in the square had also witnessed something else. One of them, barely 8 years old, drew in his notebook a female figure surrounded by stars, holding a sword in one hand and a flame in the other. When his mother asked him what it was, he replied without thinking, "It's the Lady of the Sun." She said she's coming to cleanse the earth. That night, no one slept. Only 3 days had passed since the sun dance. The world was still trying to understand what had happened, and those who witnessed the phenomenon remained deeply moved, as if something had been engraved in their souls. Isabel remained in seclusion, but that afternoon she asked to speak to a specific group, the consecrated. She said that the Blessed Mother had entrusted her with a message reserved for priests, nuns, and religious men and women. "It's urgent, and it's not easy," she announced in a trembling voice. "But it must be said, even if it hurts." A meeting was called for the afternoon in the local chapel. The church was filled with men and women in habits, elderly priests, seminarians, and sisters with worried faces. Many had come from other cities and even neighboring countries. They were there because they had felt an inner calling they could not ignore. They didn't know why, but their hearts told them, "Go, now." Isabel entered barefoot, her face pale, her gaze fixed on the altar. She knelt, prayed in silence for a few minutes, and then turned to those present. "The message I have received is not for the lukewarm. It is for the brave. For those who still love the Lamb with all their heart." The chapel fell completely silent. The Virgin said, "There is no more time. And my consecrated ones still sleep. They still calculate. They still fear losing what was never theirs." A murmur of shock ran through the room. Isabel continued. He said, "Where are those who should shout from the rooftops? Why are they silent? Why are they hiding? Why do they prefer applause to silent martyrdom?" Some began to weep. Others bowed their heads as if acknowledging a truth that was too heavy to bear. "Many consecrated persons are no longer mine," said Mother's message. "They have exchanged their hearts for prestige, their mission for diplomacy, their cross for comfort, and the flock suffers. My children walk without a shepherd. When they speak, they utter human words, not words from heaven. When they teach, they no longer transmit light. When they celebrate, many no longer believe in what they do." The words struck her like arrows, but Isabel did not flinch. The lady said, "There are still some faithful ones. A few, hidden, silent, persecuted even by their own brothers. I wrapped them in my mantle, but those who have betrayed my trust will see what it means to be a light that goes out when darkness comes." A priest stood up and said aloud, "But what should we do?" Isabel took a deep breath and replied, "Return to the radical nature of the gospel. Preach even when it's not convenient. Go to confession for hours, even when you have no strength. Wake up in the middle of the night to pray for those who sleep. Take the Blessed Sacrament to hospitals, prisons, and broken homes. Cry with those who weep. Be the living presence of Jesus before he himself returns in power and glory." And then she said something unexpected. "Our Lady showed me a map with hundreds of parishes, and in each one there was a flame. Some burned brightly, others were just embers, and many were already extinguished. She paused, looking directly into the eyes of the consecrated people present. She wept as she showed them this. She said, "The parishes where there is no worship, where there is no confession, where the gospel is compromised, will be the first to fall." Emotion filled the chapel. An older sister began to pray aloud, asking for mercy. A young deacon fell to his knees and cried, "Lord, forgive my fear." Elizabeth, her face serene, declared, "She's listening, but she wants action. Promises aren't enough anymore. There's no time for plans. Either you give everything or you lose everything." The atmosphere of the meeting became intense, but also full of grace. It was as if the souls present were being purified from within. Many confessed right there on the floor, in front of the altar. Others made an act of renewed consecration, promising to live their vocation with holiness no matter the cost. Finally, Elizabeth delivered a final message. The Virgin said, "When my consecrated ones once again become living lamps, the world will see miracles it hasn't seen since Pentecost. But if you remain silent, angels will take your place." And then she withdrew, leaving behind a silence filled with fear and hope. From that day on, something changed. Masses were once again celebrated with profound reverence. Perpetual adoration was re-established in several chapels. The confessionals, once empty, were once again filled. Some religious abandoned their commitments to institutions to return to direct service to the poor. Others left the country to go on missions in areas of spiritual conflict. And it all began with a phrase, "There is no time left." The last lines spoken by Isabel that night remained engraved in the hearts of those present. Don't be afraid of losing everything for Christ. Be afraid of losing it for almost nothing. And as the fire rekindled in the hearts of the consecrated, the next revelation approached, a revelation that would show the places chosen by Mary to resist what was to come. It was in the silence of the early morning that Elizabeth spoke again. It was Thursday, 3:15 in the morning. Her grandmother woke up to the creaking of the wooden chair, and upon leaving the room, she found her granddaughter kneeling before a lit candle. She was praying with her eyes closed and her mouth half open, as if listening to something. The lady said nothing. She simply sat beside her, silent. When dawn broke, Elizabeth only murmured, "He showed me the map." And that map was not like the ones we know. That morning, Isabel asked everyone who had received the revelations with faith to gather. She wanted to speak to those who hadn't doubted, even if they didn't understand everything. The chapel was overflowing. The meeting was held outdoors. Many came from far away. Some carried rosaries, others handwritten signs. "Mary, protect us." The atmosphere was reverent, as if everyone already knew something special was going to be said. Elizabeth began by saying, "The heart of Mary, though wounded, still guards chosen places." And the map she showed me is not a political map. It is a spiritual map. It shows where faith is still alive, where the flame of love has not been extinguished, where the name of God is spoken with fear and truth. She said that the Virgin showed small villages, isolated communities, humble parishes, and even simple homes where entire families prayed the rosary in silence. Places invisible to the world, but visible to heaven. She said, "In these places, when darkness comes, my light will remain. When silence falls on the cities, in these houses there will be praise. When many have gone astray, here will be guidance." Elizabeth described spots on the map where there was bright light, but also others where the light was dim, as if it were about to go out. She wept as she showed them, and she said, "There is still time to rekindle some of these lights, but you must decide now." A man asked, "Will these places of refuge be saved from what is to come?" Elizabeth responded gently and firmly, "They will be spiritually protected. They will not be exempt from pain, but they will not be defeated. Faith will be their wall, prayer their weapon, consecration their shield. It is not about fleeing, but about enduring." The answer shocked them. It was unlike anything they had ever heard. It was not a promise of comfort, but of faithfulness to the end. He continued, I saw people opening their homes to form small prayer communities. I saw schools being transformed into chapels. I saw elderly people praying the rosary every night. I saw young people sleeping on the floor just to protect the tabernacle. And in those places, angels descended. The image was striking. Many wept, not out of fear, but out of hope, because they were finally hearing that heaven wasn't just warning, it was preparing. Then Isabel revealed something few expected. She showed me a name, an ancient name. And she said, "It will be a refuge for many, not because of its greatness, but because of its hidden faith." And when she spoke the name of that remote village, a group of newly arrived pilgrims burst into tears. It was their town. They had come without knowing why. Now they understood. It was no coincidence. It was a calling. Then Elizabeth uttered something that sounded like a prophecy. Days will come when the great cities will fall silent. Days when the signal will be cut off, when the markets will be empty, when the churches will be closed. But in these chosen places, there will be enough bread. There will be no lack of water, and an inexplicable peace will reign even as the whole world disintegrates from within. Many wrote it down word for word, as if it were the last instruction before the storm. A priest asked, "And what must we do to ensure that our people are counted among these protected places?" Elizabeth looked to heaven and said gently, "Pray the rosary every day. Go to confession often. Adore the Blessed Sacrament with reverence. Consecrate yourselves to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and above all, love unconditionally. Where there is true love, there is heaven." It was then that he handed a small piece of paper to the local priest. On it were written 10 names of towns, neighborhoods, and communities where the Virgin had promised special protection. The priest was paralyzed. 4 of those names were within the diocese itself. Poor, often forgotten places, where people still marched barefoot, where women sang litanies under the sun, where the Blessed Sacrament was adored even without a microphone or padded pews. And now, these humble places were the ones chosen by heaven. In the end, Isabel concluded by saying, "Don't expect the world to understand you. Many will laugh. Others will call it fanaticism. But when everything you know crumbles, you will remember that there were refugees, that there were lights in the darkness, and that the Mother always warned." And then she left again, but this time an entire group decided to accompany her home, praying silently, because something inside them told them, if there is a map, we have to be on it. And as the small shelters silently began to form, a new wave of signs began to emerge. Images that weep, rosaries that exhaled perfume, crosses that shone in the night. But the most shocking was yet to come. For heaven had not only shown where there would be light, but also who would be called to sustain that light with their own tears. 3 days after the revelation of the celestial map, a new commotion gripped the town. This time, it wasn't Elizabeth who spoke first, nor was it in a vision or in an intimate message. Matter itself began to scream. Something out of the ordinary happened before everyone's eyes, and no one, absolutely no one, could deny what they witnessed. It was as if heaven had stopped speaking only with words, and had begun to speak through tears. The image of the Virgin Mary resting in the Rosary Chapel, a small hand-painted plaster statue donated decades ago by a woman who survived a family tragedy, began showing strange signs early in the morning. The first to notice was an elderly woman who stopped by every day to light a candle before breakfast. "I saw what looked like a dark drop running down the image's eye," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought it was paint, but when I got closer, it was blood." At first, many were skeptical, but within an hour the chapel was packed. Doctors, photographers, journalists. A local expert took samples of the liquid and confirmed it that same day. It was human blood, with traces of tears. Its biological origin was impossible to explain, considering the image was solid, with no pipes or hidden mechanisms. And, in front of all the cameras, she continued to cry. Isabel, upon hearing the news, went to the place with her grandmother. She remained silent, watching the image as tears streamed down the Virgin's plaster face. Her face paled, her lips trembled. When she finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. "Cry for us." And then she fell to her knees. At that precise moment, several people began to pray out loud. There was a collective weeping. It was as if every tear that fell from the image fell directly into the hearts of those present. "The pain isn't physical," said one man. "It's like a wound in the soul." And Isabel, without looking up, repeated, "My tears are for you, for those who still don't believe, for those who are lost, for those who don't pray, for those who reject me, for those who are one step away from the abyss." That phrase spread like wildfire. Social media began streaming videos of the statue weeping blood with the caption, "My tears are for you." Within hours, international channels reported on the phenomenon. Experts sought logical explanations. Some attempted to discredit the experiment, but nothing could erase the image of the mother weeping with blood in her eyes. An image that moved where human logic could not reach, the heart. That same afternoon, Isabel asked to read a message that, according to her, the Virgin herself would deliver through the image. "My heart bleeds because I have loved you to the extreme, and yet you close the door on me. These tears are not only of sadness, they are of hope, because you can still return, but you must decide now. There are no more delays. The lukewarm soul will be the most wounded." Those present began to approach the image with reverence, leaving personal belongings, prayer requests, and handwritten letters. Some confessed their sins in low voices. Others embraced each other as if they knew it was their last chance. The atmosphere was one of mourning, but also of reconciliation, as if, before the mother's tears, all human resistance had dissolved. For 3 days straight, the image wept, and each day, Isabel spoke a new word. It said that on the first day the Virgin said, "Every tear is for a soul that is lost to pride." The second day, "I weep for my consecrated children who deny me with their silence." On the third day, "My tears will cease when hearts open, but if they don't open, then heaven will also remain silent." These words resonated everywhere. Many parishes began night vigils. Fasting groups were spontaneously organized. Young people who had mocked the messages began asking for prayer. And the most surprising thing was that in other countries, similar stories began to emerge. Weeping images, signs in the sky, hearts touched by something invisible. A priest present from the first day summed up the general sentiment. The Virgin no longer cries, she bleeds, and when a mother reaches that point, it's because her children are in real danger. He who for years had doubted the revelations and apparitions was now the first to lead daily processions with a rosary in his hand. And his homily the following week was clear. "We no longer have excuses. Heaven weeps before us. What is missing now is our response." At the end of the third day, Elizabeth declared that the next stage of revelation would begin with the little ones. "The little ones will speak," she said, "for innocence will be the last bulwark against the darkness." And with that, the next part of the heavenly calling began, where even the little ones would begin to see, hear, and proclaim. For when the great ones are silent, God raises up the little ones, and the Virgin, still in tears, continued waiting. 3 days after the revelation of the celestial map, a new commotion gripped the town. This time, it wasn't Elizabeth who spoke first. Nor did she do so in a vision or an intimate message. Matter itself began to scream. Something out of the ordinary happened before everyone's eyes, and no one, absolutely no one, could deny what they had witnessed. It was as if heaven had stopped speaking only in words and had begun to speak through tears. The image of the Virgin Mary resting in the Rosary Chapel, a small, hand-painted plaster statue donated decades ago by a woman who survived a family tragedy, began showing strange signs early in the morning. The first to notice was an elderly woman who stopped by every day to light a candle before breakfast. "I saw what looked like a dark drop running down the image's eye," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought it was paint, but when I got closer, it was blood." At first, many were skeptical, but within an hour the chapel was packed. Doctors, photographers, journalists. A local expert took samples of the liquid and confirmed it that same day. It was human blood, with traces of tears. Its biological origin was impossible to explain, considering the image was solid, with no pipes or hidden mechanisms. And, in front of all the cameras, she continued to cry. Isabel, upon hearing the news, went to the place with her grandmother. She remained silent, watching the image as tears streamed down the Virgin's plaster face. Her face paled, her lips trembled. When she finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. "Cry for us." And then she fell to her knees. At that precise moment, several people began to pray out loud. There was a collective weeping. It was as if every tear that fell from the image fell directly into the hearts of those present. "The pain isn't physical," said one man. "It's like a wound in the soul." And Isabel, without looking up, repeated, "My tears are for you, for those who still don't believe, for those who are lost, for those who don't pray, for those who reject me, for those who are one step away from the abyss." That phrase spread like wildfire. Social media began streaming videos of the statue weeping blood with the caption, "My tears are for you." Within hours, international channels reported on the phenomenon. Experts sought logical explanations. Some attempted to discredit the experiment, but nothing could erase the image of the mother weeping with blood in her eyes. An image that moved where human logic could not reach, the heart. That same afternoon, Isabel asked to read a message that, according to her, the Virgin herself would deliver through the image. "My heart bleeds because I have loved you to the extreme, and yet you close the door on me. These tears are not only of sadness, they are of hope, because you can still return, but you must decide now. There are no more delays. The lukewarm soul will be the most wounded." Those present began to approach the image with reverence, leaving personal belongings, prayer requests, and handwritten letters. Some confessed their sins in low voices. Others embraced each other as if they knew it was their last chance. The atmosphere was one of mourning, but also of reconciliation, as if, before the mother's tears, all human resistance had dissolved. For 3 days straight, the image wept, and each day, Isabel spoke a new word. It said that on the first day the Virgin said, "Every tear is for a soul that is lost to pride." The second day, "I weep for my consecrated children who deny me with their silence." On the third day, "My tears will cease when hearts open, but if they don't open, then heaven will also remain silent." These words resonated everywhere. Many parishes began night vigils. Fasting groups were spontaneously organized. Young people who had mocked the messages began asking for prayer. And the most surprising thing was that in other countries, similar stories began to emerge. Weeping images, signs in the sky, hearts touched by something invisible. A priest present from the first day summed up the general sentiment. The Virgin no longer cries, she bleeds, and when a mother reaches that point, it's because her children are in real danger. He who for years had doubted the revelations and apparitions was now the first to lead daily processions with a rosary in his hand. And his homily the following week was clear. We no longer have excuses. Heaven weeps before us. What is missing now is our response. At the end of the third day, Elizabeth declared that the next stage of revelation would begin with the little ones. "The little ones will speak," she said, "for innocence will be the last bulwark against the darkness." And with that, the next part of the heavenly calling began, where even the little ones would begin to see, hear, and proclaim. For when the great ones are silent, God raises up the little ones, and the Virgin, still in tears, continued waiting. It was a simple morning, with no wind or signs in the sky when the first whispers began. Little children, some as young as 6, began to say things they'd never heard before, phrases that seemed like ancient prayers, but ones no one had taught them. Others pointed upward and said, "There she is, the White Lady," even in places where no image was visible. A few days later, worried mothers began taking their children to the chapel where the image of the Virgin had shed blood. And there, on the same sacred ground, the little ones knelt spontaneously, without anyone directing them, and began to pray. With tears in their eyes, Isabella was present. Silently, she observed what was happening with a different perspective, that of someone who already knew. At the end of a children's prayer, she stood up and spoke for the first time in days. "Saint Michael has spoken to me, and his message is for them." The silence was immediate. Many awaited a new heavenly message, but they had no idea it would come through the purity of the little ones. She said, "The final battle will not be won with swords or human strategies. It will be won with innocence, with a pure heart, with those who still believe without needing to see." Isabel pointed to a girl of barely 4 years old, kneeling with a rosary in her hand. "She can't read, but she prays with her soul, and every word that comes out of her mouth has more power than 1,000 empty speeches." St. Michael's message was clear. The little ones would be shields of light. Where the faith of adults has been contaminated by fear, the little ones will keep the flame alive. They will hear first, perceive first, and be the first to kneel when the heavens open. Isabel said that St. Michael showed her a vision. Children gathered in simple houses, protecting images of the Virgin, while outside chaos, screams, and confusion reigned. They will be the last connecting thread between heaven and earth, when many have already lost faith. Some mothers began to cry, others knelt beside their children. It was impossible to contain the emotion. Seeing children who had previously been unable to sit still for even 5 minutes, now praying for long periods, their eyes closed and tears streaming down their faces, was like witnessing a silent miracle. One father testified, "My 7-year-old son woke up in the middle of the night, saying he needed to pray for a priest who was about to fall. 2 days later, we learned that the parish priest in the neighboring village had left the ministry." Isabel revealed that St. Michael also warned of the danger lurking among children. The enemy knows who the pure are, and he wants to harm them first. That's why every child needs to be consecrated. Every home needs to be sealed with prayer. From that night on, entire families began praying the rosary with their children, not as an obligation, but as a means of spiritual survival. One of the most memorable moments was when an 8-year-old boy asked to speak. He stood on a small step next to the altar and in a calm voice said, "The White Lady told me not to be afraid, that even if everything collapsed, she would cover me with her mantle." It was like a spark. The entire community understood in that moment. The protection promised by heaven was real, but it was necessary to embrace it with the same trust as a child. The message continued. "Those who mock the faith of little ones mock God himself. Those who scandalize the innocent will answer for every tear, but those who care for the pure, those who defend them, those who form them in prayer, will have angels camped around them." Elizabeth explained that in the end times, many adults will have hardened hearts, but the little ones will be touched by clear revelations, by dreams, by visions. They will speak, and those who have ears will hear. Then, a spontaneous movement arose. Parents bringing their children to the image of the Virgin to be consecrated. Children asking to bring the rosary to school. Teachers reporting that students, for no apparent reason, began praying in the classroom. A 9-year-old girl was seen fasting for 3 days, saying she wanted to offer her hunger so that her mother would believe again. On the 4th day, her mother appeared in the chapel weeping, asking for confession after 17 years away from the church. St. Michael warned, "Heaven will move among the pure, hell fears them, and the world despises them. But in the end, they will be the ones who sing the hymn of victory." Elizabeth reinforced, "The spiritual war has already begun, and our shields are the little hearts." At the end of that afternoon, as the sun set with a vivid orange light, Elizabeth left one last message for all present. Protect your children. Pray with them. Don't let them learn to pray with the world, but with heaven, for theirs is the kingdom that is to come. And so, when the little ones began to speak with words that no one had taught them, the heavens prepared for their final warning, because the next message would be more direct, and from the Mother of God herself. The air had a strange silence that morning. The parish bells didn't ring. Not even the birds flew over the square. Everything seemed suspended, as if the sky were holding its breath. Isabel hadn't slept. She had spent the entire night in prayer, in total silence, with a lit candle in front of an image of the Virgin. At 6:15, she got up, took her rosary, and walked alone to the grotto, where it all had begun. There she knelt, and without looking up whispered, "Mother, I am ready." At that moment, the sky seemed to respond. A light, inexplicable breeze descended upon the place. It wasn't wind. It was something more subtle, something felt in the soul, not on the skin. Those nearby began to arrive without knowing why. It was like an invisible call, gentle but irrefutable. In less than half an hour, hundreds of people surrounded Isabel, who remained kneeling, rosary between her fingers and eyes closed. There was no microphone, there was no altar, just a sacred space made of prayer and expectation. And then Isabel slowly stood up, turned to face the crowd, and with wide eyes said, "Today she told me that this is her last warning, that after this, the warning will come, and that no one, absolutely no one, will be able to say that they weren't warned." The impact of her words was immediate. Many began to cry before even understanding what she was going to say. But Isabel, without changing her tone, began to convey each word as if she knew the moment had arrived. "My children don't listen to me. They ignore me. They despise me. And yet I have pleaded for you. I have wept blood. I have asked the saints to intercede. I have begged the Father to restrain justice, but the soul of the world is sick and no longer responds." With each sentence, the silence grew heavier. Some were angry in the mud. Others were reassuring their children that they would not stand up. Isabel continued, "My last warning is not for you to be afraid. It is for you to wake up. The warning will come. It is imminent. And when it comes, every human being will see the state of their soul. Every hidden wound will be revealed, every lie exposed, every complicit silence revealed." Then he paused for a long moment. He was breathing heavily, as if carrying something too heavy for his fragile body. And then, his gaze fixed on heaven, he declared, "It will be painful, not because God will punish, but because you will see how much you have hurt love." The silence was broken by sobs. People hugged each other. Others whispered soft prayers. But everyone knew it was true. Heaven was speaking for the last time, and that call could no longer be ignored. Isabel then revealed a vision she had received in the early morning. "I saw clocks stop instantly. I saw cities in absolute silence. I saw men shouting names they no longer remembered to pronounce. I saw thousands fall to their knees, but I also saw others rebelling against their own repentance." The warning was clear. The warning will be a light that reveals all the darkness. And at that moment, there will be no masks, there will be no excuses, there will be no time to negotiate. These will be minutes that seem like an eternity. And after that moment, many will be converted, but others will be forever hardened. The Virgin Mary also reportedly said, "Receive now, confess now, forgive now, because after the warning, separation will come, and each soul will choose its destiny with full awareness." Elizabeth then pointed to the sky and concluded with the final phrase of the Mother of God, "I will speak no more, but my silence will be the loudest cry. After this, the warning will come." And in that instant, a soft, golden light enveloped the place. Everyone fell to their knees. There was no thunder, no fire, only a profound sense of truth. a heavenly seal that confirmed that everything revealed was real. And now, the sky fell silent. From that day on, Elizabeth never spoke in public again. She took refuge in prayer, but the world was never the same. Because after that final warning, thousands of people changed their lives. Churches filled up again. Parents reconciled with their children. Young people abandoned their addictions. Priests returned to being pastors of souls. And in every corner where that message reached, something awakened. Now the whole earth waits, because everyone knows deep down that what is coming has already begun to approach.